I have seen, I have heard, I have come down. It is what Elijah felt, exhausted, broken, bread still warm in his hands, when an angel touched his shoulder in the dark. And it is what is about to happen on a road outside a small Galilean town called Nain, on an ordinary afternoon, to a woman nobody was writing songs about. Her name we are never given. The text calls her simply a widow. She had already lost her husband before this story begins. We do not know how. We do not know when. We know only that, by the time Luke introduces her to us, the first loss had already happened, and now she is carrying the second one to a grave. Her only son. In first-century Jewish society, a woman's legal and economic standing was entirely dependent on the men in her household. A husband provided identity, income, protection, a place in the social order. A son, when the husband was gone, carried all of that forward. He was not merely family. He was, in the most practical and unsentimental sense, her future, her security, her continued place in the world. And he is dead. The whole town has turned out for the funeral procession. Luke mentions this, and it matters because it tells us this woman was known, was part of a community, was not friendless, but community, in this moment, can do nothing. They can walk beside her. They can carry the body. They cannot give her back what she has lost. They cannot change what tomorrow looks like without him. She is walking toward a grave at the head of a procession, and she has not said a word. She has not prayed. She has not called out to God. She has not demonstrated sufficient faith or correct theology or any of the things we sometimes quietly require of people before we decide they deserve a miracle. She is simply walking, carrying her grief the only direction available to her, forward, toward a hole in the ground, toward the end of everything she had left. Now watch what happens next. Jesus is coming the other direction. He is entering Nain with his disciples and a large crowd. It has been that kind of season in Galilee. Crowds everywhere. He goes, pressing, following, calling out. And the two processions meet at the town gate. Life coming in, death going out. And Luke records something that stops me every time I read it. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her. The Greek word is splanchnizomai. It is one of the most visceral words in the New Testament. In first-century Greek, the word splanchna referred to the intestines, the deepest internal organs, the gut. Splanchnizomai means something moved in Jesus at the gut level, not polite sympathy, not the mild sadness of someone watching difficulty from across the room. Something involuntary, something that could not be controlled or managed or kept at arm's length. His bowels moved with compassion. That is what the text actually says. When Jesus saw this woman, this unnamed widow, this person who had not called out to him, had not reached for his robe, had not demonstrated anything except the simple act of walking toward the worst moment of her life, something happened inside him that he did not choose. The seeing produced the feeling produced the movement, and the movement was immediate and total and completely unsolicited. He did not wait for her theology to be correct. He did not wait for her faith to be sufficient. He did not wait for her to ask. He walked straight toward her grief and told it to stop. "Don't cry," he says. And then he touches the coffin, which, by Jewish law, made him ceremonially unclean. And he says, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the dead man sits up and begins to talk. Luke, who is a physician and chooses his words carefully, records the moment with the simplicity of someone who has not yet found adequate language for it. Jesus gave him back to his mother. 6 words, no commentary, no theological footnote. He gave him back to his mother. The early church fathers who reflected on moments like this saw a direct line back to Hagar in the desert. The God who breaks the rules of who deserves to be found. The God who crosses the boundary between the living and the dead, the same way he crossed the boundary between the covenant and the outsider, between the loved and the unloved, between the praying and the wordless. God has never restricted his seeing to the people who had earned the right to be seen. He sees the ones nobody else is watching. And now we go back to the beginning, back to the spring on the road to Shur, back to the woman nobody was coming for, back to the story we planted at the very start of this video, because it has been waiting the whole time to be fully told. Hagar is sitting by the water, alone, Egyptian, enslaved, pregnant, abandoned, and the angel of the Lord appears and asks her 2 questions and makes her a promise, and sends her back with something she did not have when she arrived. Not safety, not freedom, not an immediate end to the suffering. A name. She calls the spring Lahai Roi. It means the well, the living one who sees me. And she calls God Roi, the God who sees me. Here is what I need you to understand about the weight of that name in the entire canon of Scripture, in 66 books, across 1,500 years of sacred writing. From Genesis to Revelation, there is only one moment where a human being gives God a personal name drawn from their own direct encounter with Him. One moment. And it is not Abraham, the father of faith. It is not Moses, the lawgiver. It is not David, the man after God's own heart. It is not any prophet, any priest, any patriarch, any person the religious establishment of any era would have selected for the honor. It is a slave girl in a desert, running away. She is Egyptian, outside the covenant. She is a woman, invisible by the standards of her culture. She is a slave with no legal standing, no voice, no claim on anything or anyone. She is the last person the story would have chosen, and she is the first person to name Him. Roi, the God who sees me. Not the God who sees everyone from some general and distant heaven. The God who sees me. The name is singular. The name is personal. The name comes from the specific experience of a specific woman in a specific desert, at a specific spring, on a specific afternoon when she had run out of road. And that name, given by the most overlooked person in the story, that name holds the whole of Scripture's answer to the question we started with. Does anyone see this? Loi says, yes, I have always seen this. I have never stopped seeing this. I was seeing this before you knew you needed to be seen. If this video has meant something to you today, if one of these 5 people felt less like a Bible character and more like a mirror, subscribe before you leave. This channel exists for exactly the people who are asking exactly the questions we have been sitting with today. And tell me in the comments, which of these 5 stories felt most like your own right now? Hagar running, Leah invisible, Israel groaning, Elijah collapsed, the widow walking. Tell me below. I read everyone. Now, 3 ideas to carry with you. The first is this. Every single time God says, I have seen, in Scripture, every instance without exception, what follows is not silence, not a waiting period, not a theological explanation for why the suffering was necessary. Action. The seeing is never the end of the sentence. It is always the beginning of a movement. Hagar does not stay in the desert forever. Israel does not stay in Egypt forever. The Widow of Nain does not reach the grave. God's I have seen is not an observation. It is the first word of a rescue. The second is harder, and it is this. The cry God responds to is not always eloquent. Look at the 5 people in today's video. Hagar was running, not praying, running. Israel was groaning, not worshiping, groaning, making the ragged, wordless sound of people who have been broken past the point where words work. Elijah was asking to die. The Widow of Nain had not said a single word, and Leah was not crying out to God at all. She was lying in a tent, unloved in the dark. Not one of them had their theology sorted. Not one of them was in a posture of triumphant faith. Not one of them did anything that our religious instincts would hold up as a model of how to approach God correctly. And God moved toward every single one of them, which means the requirement for being seen is not eloquence. It is not sufficient faith. It is not correct doctrine or a clean prayer or a heart that has worked through all its doubt before it dares to approach heaven. The requirement, as far as Scripture seems to indicate, is simply this. Be real. Be where you are. Make whatever sound you have, even a groan, even a silence, even the simple act of walking toward the worst thing that has ever happened to you, 1 foot in front of the other, with nothing left in your chest but the terrible weight of it. The rabbis were right. Even a sigh is heard in heaven. And the third, the one I want to leave you with, is this. Hagar named God from the worst season of her life. Not from a mountaintop. Not from a moment of triumph or clarity or spiritual breakthrough. From a desert spring, alone, pregnant, abandoned, running from a situation she had not chosen and could not control. She named him from the bottom. That name was not given by Abraham. It was not given by Moses. It was not given by David or Solomon or Isaiah. or any of the towering figures of the faith, whose names we know and whose statues we would build. It was given by the person the ancient world had written off entirely, the slave, the foreigner, the woman with no legal standing and no covenant claim, and no reason by any religious accounting to expect God to show up. She saw God seeing her, and she named him for it. Which means, if you are the person in your own story who feels least qualified to be found, least deserving of divine attention, least likely to be the one God shows up for, you are precisely the person this pattern was written for. You are in the oldest and most repeated story in Scripture. You are standing at a spring on the road to somewhere, and the God who sees has already seen you, and he is already moving. You have never been invisible. Not once. Not for a single moment of the worst season you have ever lived through. LOI has been watching the whole time. And he always moves.